Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're going on a deep dive into something really interesting that you sent our way.
Yeah.
It's this article all about how having really high standards can actually kind of backfire on you,
Especially in your career.
especially in your career.
So we're looking at high standards hurt career success. And it's fascinating stuff.
It really makes you think differently about what we think of as success.
Yeah, it really challenges those assumptions.
It does.
So the main point of this article is that striving for perfection, even though, we think of it as a good thing,
Right.
can sometimes actually be a roadblock
Yeah.
in your professional life, which
Yeah.
is interesting because how often are we told to aim high and give 110% and all of that?
All the time.
But this article is
Like
saying
so fast.
maybe not.
Yeah.
So what I think is so interesting here is that the article isn't saying to completely abandon having high standards.
No, not at all.
It's more about recognizing that those super high expectations can actually lead to burnout for you.
Missed deadlines for the team,
For sure.
and even just like friction with your colleagues.
Friction, for sure. Yeah, that's, if those high standards are not managed well,
Right.
if they're not sort of tempered
Exactly.
with a little bit of realism.
Yeah, it's like pushing for perfection on every little detail might not actually be the most effective use of everyone's time.
Exactly. And you might not even get a better result for it.
Right. And the article gives this great example of a client who kept their team working late into the night
Oh, yeah, I remember this one.
to make these tiny little tweaks on a proposal.
Just minuscule.
And it's like, were those tweaks really worth all of that extra effort?
And keeping everybody, up till midnight.
Exactly.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, they were so focused on making it perfect
Yes.
that they kind of missed the bigger picture.
Oh, I've totally been there.
I think we all have.
Spending hours on something that probably nobody's even going to notice.
Nobody will even notice.
And meanwhile, everybody is exhausted and stressed.
Totally.
So how do we avoid falling into that trap?
That's the big question.
The article lays out 4 key strategies.
Okay.
And I have to say, they're pretty eye-opening.
Yeah, they really are. I found myself nodding along as I was reading this.
Me too.
So the first one that they talk about is all about taking a pause.
Okay.
So it's not just about, having those high standards. It's about regularly checking in with yourself to see if those standards are still actually serving you and your team.
Okay. So it's not just about like setting them and forgetting them.
Exactly. You've got to revisit them.
Got to check in.
Yeah, and ask yourself, are these standards still relevant to what we're actually trying to achieve here?
Well, that's a great question.
Are they in line with the company goals?
Yeah.
And I think most importantly, have I actually communicated these standards clearly to my team?
That communication piece is so huge.
It is, because we often just assume that everyone's on the same page, but
They're not.
they're often not. Right. And that can lead to so much frustration on everybody's part.
Exactly. So the article suggests taking even just 15 minutes a week to think about this.
Oh, that's doable.
Totally doable.
15 minutes.
Yeah. And it can make such a difference in how you lead and collaborate.
Yeah, I like that. Okay, so pause and reflect.
Pause and reflect. That's number 1.
Got it. What's next?
Number 2 is flexibility.
Oh, okay.
And this is where the idea of social capital comes in.
Right.
It's about understanding the social dynamics at play. Being aware of how your feedback lands on others and adjusting your approach accordingly.
Because sometimes, good enough really is good enough.
Sometimes good enough is good enough. Exactly.
So it's not just about what you expect.
Right.
It's how you communicate those expectations to your team.
Exactly. And, think about that client that we were talking about.
The one who kept their team up all night.
Yeah, they could have achieved the same outcome. A high-quality proposal.
Yeah.
Without burning everyone out. It's
Right.
about finding that balance. This is making me think about my own team and some of the dynamics there.
I bet.
So we've got pause and we've got flexibility.
Yes.
What about the work environment itself?
Oh, that's a big one.
The article talks about cultural fit.
Yeah.
What does that even mean?
Well, it's about taking stock of whether your current workplace actually supports your strengths and standards.
Okay.
It's almost like doing a culture check.
The culture check.
Yeah, where you look at things like your performance reviews, 360 feedback, and even just having a candid conversation with your manager to get their perspective.
Oh, I love that idea of a culture check.
Yeah.
Are my high standards celebrated here?
Yeah.
Or am I just constantly fighting an uphill battle?
Or are you swimming upstream all the time?
Yes. Have you ever experienced that disconnect in your own career?
Absolutely. And I think, the article acknowledges that sometimes having different standards can actually push a company to grow and evolve.
Oh, that's interesting.
it can be a good thing sometimes to have someone who's pushing the envelope a little bit. But if you're consistently struggling to uphold your standards in a place that just doesn't value them,
Right.
it can be incredibly draining.
Yeah, you're just constantly like banging your head against the wall.
Exactly. And it might be a sign that it's time to consider finding a better fit elsewhere.
That is a really good point. It's like you can only fight against the current for so long
Right.
before you have to think about swimming in a different direction.
Exactly.
But before we jump to conclusions,
Yes.
there's one more strategy the article highlights.
Okay, hit me.
That is crucial for navigating these situations, and that is productive conflict.
Ooh, conflict.
Yeah, I know it's a word that makes people uncomfortable,
It does.
but disagreements are inevitable.
Especially when you've got passionate people with strong opinions.
Exactly.
Which is often the case in these situations.
Right, so how do we make conflict a positive thing?
How do we make it productive?
How do we turn it from this scary thing into something that actually helps us?
Well, the key here is to approach disagreements with the assumption of good intentions.
Cool.
So even if someone has a different viewpoint, believe that they genuinely want the project to succeed.
Okay, so it's like a mindset shift.
There really is.
Instead of viewing it as like us versus them,
Right.
it's more like we're all on the same team here.
Exactly. We're all in this together.
And we're just trying to figure out the best way to move forward.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that you don't always have to win the argument.
Sometimes it's okay to let it go.
Sometimes letting go is the best thing you can do for everybody involved.
That really ties back to that central question that the article poses.
Which is,
When is good enough actually good enough?
when is good enough good enough?
That's it?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that striving for perfection in every single instance can be counterproductive.
And sometimes even harmful.
Absolutely. It can burn people out.
Yeah.
It can cause resentment.
It can damage relationships.
Totally. So sometimes it's wiser to focus our energy on the things that truly matter, the things that will have the biggest impact.
Right. It's about being strategic with your energy.
Exactly. And, there's that famous saying, the 80-20 rule.
Oh, yeah. 80% of the results come from 20% of the effort.
Exactly. So which 20% are you going to focus on?
That's the question. So we've talked about these 4 strategies, pausing to reflect being flexible, assessing cultural fit,
Yes.
and embracing productive conflict.
Mhm.
But I'm curious to hear more about how those actually play out in real life situations.
Sure.
Does the article give us any examples?
It does. It does. There's one that comes to mind that's about a leader who consistently got feedback about their,
Okay.
well, let's just call it a lack of teamwork.
Okay, so this person was like a top performer,
Individually, yeah.
but their approach was kind of causing some friction
Yeah, it was creating problems.
within the team.
Yeah,
And I could see how that happens.
totally.
It's like their intentions were good,
Right, they wanted to do good work.
but the way they were going about it wasn't really working.
Yeah, their methods were kind of rubbing people the wrong way.
Yeah,
And this is where that culture check becomes so important.
that culture check that we talked about.
Yeah.
Because even if your standards are really high,
Right.
if they're not aligned with how your team works or with the company culture as a whole, you're going to run into some problems.
You're going to hit a wall.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The article actually mentions this technique
Okay.
called the 360-degree assessment,
Oh, yeah. I've heard of those.
which can be really helpful in getting a more well-rounded view of how your standards and work style are perceived by others.
Oh, so it's like getting feedback from all sides.
From all sides. Yeah.
Your boss, your peers.
The people who report to you.
Yeah. Everyone.
I mean, it could be a little nerve-wracking,
It can be.
but I can see how valuable that would be,
Oh, yeah.
especially if you're getting consistent feedback that maybe something's not quite working. Totally. It can help you identify those blind spots, those areas where your high standards might be creating unintended consequences.
Oh, interesting.
So, for example, you might think you're being helpful by providing really detailed feedback,
Okay.
but it could be coming across as micromanaging
Oh, to your team?
to your team, exactly. And then that can lead to resentment and,
Yeah, it can backfire.
yeah,
And that goes back to the importance of flexibility,
right.
being able to adapt your communication style depending on who you're working with.
Absolutely. And recognizing that there are multiple paths to success.
Yes.
And that sometimes letting go of a little control can actually lead to better results.
I like that. Okay, let's circle back to productive conflict for a second,
Sure.
because the article gives some really practical tips on how to handle disagreements
Yeah.
without letting them spiral out of control.
Without turning it into a big fight.
Exactly. So how do we do that?
Well, one of the most important tips, and we touched on this a little bit earlier, is to assume good intentions. But it goes beyond that.
Yeah.
It's about actively listening to the other person's perspective,
Yeah.
trying to really understand where they're coming from.
Even if you don't agree with them.
Even if you don't agree, and that can be hard,
Oh, it's so hard.
especially when you feel really strongly about something.
But I can see how taking that step back and really listening can de-escalate the situation.
It can.
And it can also lead to better solutions.
Absolutely. You might learn something new.
You might.
Or come up with a more creative approach that you wouldn't have considered if you were just stuck in your own head.
I like that there's a line in the article that really stuck with me, and it says,
Okay.
you don't always have to win every disagreement.
Ooh, that's a good one.
It's so true.
Yeah, sometimes the best thing you can do is let go of the need to be right
Mm-hmm.
and just find a compromise that works for everyone.
A solution that moves everyone forward.
Exactly.
This all ties back to that central question that the article keeps coming back to.
When is good enough actually good enough?
When is good enough good enough?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question.
So we've talked a lot about how to adjust our standards within like a given workplace.
Right.
But what if you've tried all these things and you still feel like you're just constantly battling to maintain your standards
Mm-hmm.
in an environment that just doesn't value them?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it leads us to another point that the article makes, which
Oh,
is it sometimes better to walk away?
whoa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a big decision.
It is a big decision, but sometimes it's the right one.
I mean, I can see how it might be necessary in some cases.
Yeah. The article suggests doing a sort of cost-benefit analysis.
Okay.
So, are your high standards being appreciated
And rewarded.
and rewarded in this environment?
Yeah.
Or are they causing more stress and frustration than they're worth?
It's a good question.
It's a tough question.
And it's not just about your own satisfaction either, right? It's
Mhm.
about your career trajectory.
Yeah, if your talents and your high standards are constantly being stifled,
Right. If you feel like you're being held back,
it might be time to look for an organization that's a better fit.
that's where you can really shine.
So it's about knowing your worth
Knowing your worth.
and being willing to seek out a workplace that aligns with your values and ambitions.
Exactly. It's about finding the right pond for your fish.
Ooh, I like that metaphor.
Yeah. And, finding the right fit, it's a two-way street.
Right. It's not just about the company choosing you.
Exactly. It's about you choosing them.
It's about finding a company that doesn't just tolerate your high standards,
Yeah.
but actively embraces them.
Celebrates them.
That's such a good point. It's about finding a place where your strengths are seen as assets, not liabilities.
Exactly.
Imagine working in an environment where your commitment to excellence is encouraged and supported.
Oh, that's the dream, isn't it?
It is the dream.
To be surrounded by people who push you to be your best,
Who inspire you?
who share your passion.
Oh, now I'm getting chills.
Me.
That's the dream.
And the article reminds us it is possible.
It is?
It might take some searching,
Some trial and error.
some, bumps along the way.
Yeah.
But finding that perfect fit can make all the difference.
In your career and your overall well-being.
In your life.
Okay, so I think we've covered just about everything in this article.
I think so.
From those surprising downsides of having high standards
Right.
to those empowering strategies
Those 4 strategies.
for finding that sweet spot between excellence and getting things done.
Yeah.
And even that kind of bold idea of walking away when necessary.
When it's time.
This deep dive has been so insightful.
It really has. It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
And with you, our listener.
To our listener out there, thank you for joining us.
We hope you found this deep dive as thought-provoking as we did.
We did.
But before we sign off, we have one final question for you to ponder.
Okay.
Hit us with it.
That's a really great question to leave our listeners with. It really is. It encourages them to think about what we talked about today and apply it to their own work life.
Right, because at the end of the day, it's all about finding what works best for you.
For you and your career.
And for your well-being.
Exactly.
There's no one-size-fits-all answer.
Nope.
When it comes to, setting and maintaining these high standards.
Not at all.
This deep dive has been so interesting.
It really has.
Just in highlighting that high standards,
Yeah.
while we think of them as a good thing,
Right.
they can actually sometimes hold you back
If you're not careful.
if they're not balanced
Yeah.
with flexibility and self-awareness and a healthy dose of perspective.
Perspective is so important.
It really is.
Knowing when to push and when to let go.
So it's not about lowering our standards.
No.
It's about being more strategic
Yeah.
and thoughtful
Or intention.
how we apply them.
Exactly.
It's about knowing when to push for perfection
Right.
and when to embrace good enough.
Good enough is good enough sometimes.
Yeah. It really is.
And sometimes it's even better.
And maybe even more importantly, it's about finding that work environment
Yeah.
where your standards are not only respected,
Right.
but truly celebrated,
Celebrate it. Yeah, where you feel support.
where you can thrive.
That's the key.
So to our listeners out there,
Yeah.
we encourage you to take these insights
Yeah.
and see how they resonate with your own experiences.
Think about it in the context of your own work.
Think about your own standards,
Yes.
your own work environment.
And don't be afraid to make a change if you need to. Sometimes change is good.
Sometimes change is really scary, but sometimes it's necessary.
It is. You deserve to be in a place where you're
Yes.
valued.
Where your talents are seen and appreciated.
Exactly.
Remember, your career is a journey, not a destination.
It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Oh, I like that.
And it's up to you to create a path that leads to both fulfillment
Yes.
and success.
On your own terms.
On your own terms. That's the key.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll be back next week with another fascinating topic.
We will.
Until then, keep learning, keep growing
And keep striving.
for that perfect balance
That balance.
between excellence and well-being.
We'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.